The night they burned my barn, I stood in the smoke holding my grandfather's hammer, feeling the weight of everything I'd lost. Neighbors whispered it was an accident, but I knew better. And when I looked Brenda Kilpatrick in the eye, I swore she'd learned the one truth she never saw coming. I'm not just another man she can intimidate. I'm a federal judge. Please subscribe for support and comment me. Where are you watching from? The smell of burned oak and diesel still clung to the air when the sun rose at 5:47 a.m. My boots crunched across the blackened remains of what had once been my great-grandfather's barn. Every step pressed ash deeper into the soil, a reminder of how quickly 70 years of family history had been turned to dust. The metal beams, twisted by the flames, still radiated heat. I paused and stared, silent, my gaze locked on the smoking ruin. Sometimes silence says more than words. Sometimes it tells the story of pain you can't measure. That barn wasn't just wood and nails. It was the heart of my family. My grandfather, Seamus Brennan, had built it with his own hands back in 1952. Every oak beam was cut from these fields, every joint fitted tight enough to last a lifetime. It was the place where dried corn carried its sweet scent through the autumn air, where tobacco smoke once drifted from Seamus's pipe, and where 3 generations had sheltered their harvests through Iowa winters. Now all that remained was smoke, and the faint clang of my grandfather's hammer, charred but not destroyed, lying in the rubble. I bent down, picked it up, and held it in my hand. It felt heavier than I remembered, as if it carried not just iron but memory. That hammer will come back into this story later, because in a way, it became the weapon I never expected to wield. People think retirement is supposed to bring peace. That's what I believed when I left the federal bench after 27 years. I thought I'd spend my days restoring tractors, tending to fields, and finding quiet after losing my wife Margaret to cancer. I thought silence would heal. But the truth is, silence in these ashes felt like betrayal, because someone had chosen to light a match. And that someone was Brenda Kilpatrick, the self-appointed queen of the Millfield Estates Homeowners Association. Brenda didn't just dislike my barn. To her, it was an eyesore, a blemish on her empire of 847 cookie-cutter houses lined up like soldiers. She ran her HOA like it was her personal kingdom, ruling in designer suits and heels that clicked across pavement like a countdown clock. To her, image was everything. To me, this land was memory, sacrifice, and bloodline. She saw property value. I saw the legacy of a man who came from County Cork in 1948 with shrapnel in his leg and calloused hands that knew how to build something that lasted. 2 worlds colliding. Imagine watching flames swallow the place where your childhood was carved. Imagine knowing it wasn't an accident, but an act of control, a warning wrapped in fire. What would you do if your HOA president burned down the barn your great-grandfather built with his Purple Heart hands? That's not a rhetorical question. Drop your answer in the comments, because I guarantee many of you have your own Brenda trying to control your neighborhood right now. I stood there that morning, holding the hammer, feeling the kind of fury that doesn't explode outward but sharpens inward. The kind that feels cold, focused, like the stillness before a storm breaks. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about something bigger, because Brenda didn't know who she was up against. She thought I was just some retired old man she could push aside. She never bothered to check my past. She didn't realize that the man standing in these ashes was the same federal judge who once sent the entire Riverside County Commission to prison for a combined 23 years. She had no idea that dismantling corruption had been my life's work. Brenda's mistake wasn't just torching a barn. It was igniting a case she couldn't win. My years on the bench taught me how to recognize patterns of power abused, how to track every bribe and every threat, how to turn intimidation into evidence. And as I looked out over the smoldering wreckage, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of hers. The morning light cut through the haze like a theater spotlight, turning the smoke into shifting curtains on a stage. I could almost see my wife Margaret there, her memory standing at the edge of the field, quiet and strong. Grief is strange. It can hollow you out, but it can also harden you. Losing her taught me the weight of silence, the pain of empty rooms, and the strength to keep standing when the world tries to break you. That barn, now gone, carried her laughter too, echoes of us walking hand in hand through rows of corn, dreaming of peace that never came. In its destruction, something inside me stirred, something that felt like a second calling. It's moments like these that force you to look deeper at what justice really means. Justice isn't only about laws written in books. It's about defending the spaces, the memories, the people that powerful hands try to erase for profit. Brenda thought she was unstoppable, shielded by her titles and her allies. But the truth is, people like her build their empires on fear. And fear only works until someone decides not to bow. I want you to imagine this. 70 years of history gone in a single night, replaced by the sound of hoses spraying, the crackle of dying flames, and neighbors watching from a quarter-mile away. They saw smoke rising against the dawn, but they didn't know what I was already planning in the shadows of my mind. They didn't know that this barn fire would become the key to uncovering something much larger than one HOA president's obsession with control. Some of you watching may have faced similar battles. Maybe your story doesn't involve fire, but you felt that pressure, that slow suffocation by rules, fines, or threats that make you feel like a stranger on your own land. Maybe you've looked out your window and wondered if you were the only one willing to stand up. I'm here to tell you you're not, and this story is proof. As the ashes cooled that morning, I didn't see ruin. I saw evidence. I saw the outline of a case forming, one that would lead straight to the heart of Brenda's empire. Every scorch mark on those beams was a page in the record. Every nail left in the dirt was testimony. And that hammer in my hand, it wasn't just a tool anymore. It was a symbol, a reminder that some legacies can't be burned away, and some battles are worth fighting no matter the cost. This is the story of how one HOA president believed she could erase a family's past to protect her profits, and how she accidentally awakened something she never expected. The ashes behind me weren't the end. They were the start of a storm that would shake her world to its foundation. And trust me, when you spend nearly 3 decades dismantling corruption from the bench, you learn exactly how to bring an empire down, one piece at a time. Stay with me. This isn't just about a barn. It's about power, community, loss, and the fight to reclaim what's right. It's about a woman who thought she held all the cards, and a man who'd already spent his life proving that no one is above justice. And when this story ends, I promise you'll see how even the darkest night can set the stage for a dawn no tyrant can stop. The sun was still low when I left the burned barn behind and walked back toward the house, the hammer heavy in my hand. The metal smelled faintly of smoke and history, like the weight of generations pressing against my palm. I placed it on the kitchen table, its surface scarred from years of meals, arguments, and quiet moments with Margaret. Looking at it now, I could almost see her across from me, sipping tea, her soft voice reminding me that silence sometimes wins more battles than words. But silence hadn't saved her from cancer. And it sure as hell wasn't going to save me from Brenda Kilpatrick. I poured coffee into the mug I always used. The one that read, "I survived 27 years of federal court. And all I got was this lousy retirement." The irony wasn't lost on me. Retirement wasn't about peace anymore, it was about war, the kind Brenda had dragged me into. As I sat there, I thought about Seamus, my grandfather, and the day he taught me to drive the old John Deere tractor. I was 12, hands shaking as they gripped the wheel. He'd laid his own scarred hands over mine, steady and certain, whispering, "This land will always be ours, if we remember to fight for it." That memory returned with a bite of cold air drifting through the window. Maybe Seamus had known this day would come. The knock on my door broke the silence like a gavel striking oak. When I opened it, Dale Hoffman stood on the porch, clutching a clipboard so thick it looked like it could stop a bullet. His county pickup idled behind him, coughing gray smoke into the morning air. Dale was the county code enforcement officer, a man known more for his nervous sweat than his authority. "Mr. Brennan," he stammered, his Adam's apple jerking like it wanted out of his throat. "I've got some, complaints." I let him in, and the smell of his cologne mixed uneasily with the lingering scent of charred wood drifting through the windows. He flipped through pages that rattled like dry leaves, noise violations, dust control issues, rodent concerns, septic problems, environmental hazards. 14 complaints in 1 week, all anonymous. My farm had stood here since Eisenhower was president, yet suddenly it was a public menace? I knew the pattern well. It reeked of pressure. I leaned forward. "Dale, who's leaning on you?" His hands trembled as he pulled out his phone. On the screen was a voicemail transcript, Brenda's voice as clear as a church bell. "The Brennan situation requires immediate and comprehensive attention. I trust you understand the importance of maintaining community standards. Rise Company has several county projects coming up for bid." That was it, the smoking gun. I'd seen corruption in all its forms, from slick suits in federal offices to backroom deals in small towns, but Brenda's arrogance was unmatched. She didn't even bother hiding her threats. Dale looked at me like a man waiting for a verdict. "Judge, I've got twin daughters heading to college. If I don't play along, I lose my job." Here was the contradiction that always haunted me. Good men caught in bad systems. Dale wasn't my enemy, not really. He was just another pawn Brenda had pushed into place. But pawns can still choose whether to move or not. "Dale," I said quietly, "you're being used to carry out illegal harassment. Iowa's Right to Farm Act protects me. Every single complaint on that list falls under nuisance ordinances that don't apply here. If you file these, you're not just doing your job, you're committing misconduct." His face turned white, like snow before the first plow. "What am I supposed to do?" "Do your job honestly," I answered. "Document that my farm predates this development, that these complaints don't stand. Follow the law, not her orders. And if Brenda asks why, you tell her you're not willing to go to prison for her crusade." For 30 minutes, Dale photographed barns, tractors, and farm equipment that had been here long before his career began. I watched him, but more than that, I was building a case. Every note, every picture, every nervous glance, it all added to the file growing thicker on my desk. And right then, I realized the fire Brenda started in my barn was nothing compared to the fire she had just started in me. That night, at exactly 8:47 p.m., my phone rang. Brenda's voice was sharp, the kind of tone that could freeze the air. "Mr. Brennan, I understand you've been interfering with community enforcement. That's a dangerous habit." I laughed softly, letting years of courtroom authority bleed into my words. "Miss Kilpatrick, I've only documented your abuse of power." "Nothing more, nothing less." Her laugh echoed coldly through the line. "People who insist on being difficult neighbors often find their problems multiply, exponentially." The line went silent after that, but silence can scream louder than shouting. I set the phone down and stared again at the hammer on my table. Margaret's picture sat just beside it, her smile gentle, her eyes forever patient. Loss teaches you what really matters, and in that moment, I realized I wasn't fighting just for myself. I was fighting for every neighbor too scared to speak. Brenda's next move came swiftly. 10 days later, a process server handed me papers that accused me of operating a structurally dangerous agricultural facility and demanded $50,000 in damages for diminished property. Values. The words on the page were laughable. Terrorist. Concealment opportunities in a corn barn. But behind the absurdity was something real. Brenda had hired Hawthorne Sterling, a big-money firm from Des Moines, known for crushing rural landowners. This wasn't neighborhood bickering anymore. This was war. I dug into county property records, and the truth cut deep. For the past 18 months, shell companies had been buying up farmland around Millfield Estates. Every deed led back to Kilpatrick Development Solutions. My land was the last holdout. Brenda wasn't just obsessed with her HOA standards. She was orchestrating a land grab empire worth millions. My barn wasn't her problem. It was my refusal to sell. And here's the twist most people never see coming. The real battle isn't about what you can see. It's about the hidden deals happening behind closed doors. The anger boiling in me needed an outlet. So I called Michael Chen, my former law clerk, now one of Chicago's toughest civil rights attorneys. "Michael," I said, "I've got a case for you. Brenda just filed the most frivolous lawsuit I've ever seen. Within 72 hours, Michael filed a motion to dismiss and a federal countersuit under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, stripping immunity from any official who abused their power. That meant Brenda and her allies could be sued personally, their own money on the line. The legal chessboard was set. but the past still lingered, shaping every move. I remembered my last conversation with Margaret before she died. She told me, voice frail but steady, "Thad, you've spent your life fighting corruption. Don't ever stop. Not for me, not for anyone." Her words became a drumbeat in my ears as I held the court filings in my hands. But while Michael attacked from the legal front, the FBI began to circle in. Agent Sarah Kowalski called me, her voice crisp and controlled. "Judge, your HOA situation just became a federal priority. We've been tracking land fraud across 6 counties. Brenda fits the exact pattern: harassment, shell companies, forced sales." Suddenly, my fight wasn't just personal. It was part of something bigger. Brenda thought she was controlling a neighborhood, but she had unknowingly walked straight into a federal investigation. Still, Brenda wasn't done. She doubled down with sabotage. My power cut at 2:17 a.m., my water pressure gone, an anonymous letter in the local paper painting me as a recluse with dangerous tendencies. And then the video evidence. Brenda's white Mercedes creeping past my property just before the blackout. Proof that she wasn't just pulling strings from her office, she was out in the dark, circling like a predator. And if you think Brenda was finished, wait until you see how far she was willing to go, because the next move she made turned this fight into something deadly serious. The smoke of the barn still haunted my mornings, drifting into the house through cracks in the old wood frames. Each time I smelled it, I remembered Margaret's voice, my grandfather's hands, and the promise I'd made silently in the ashes. This wasn't just about me anymore. Brenda had turned neighbors into prisoners in their own homes. And now, she was threatening families who didn't dare push back. But when Marcus Rodriguez, a young father from Millfield Estates, came to me with tears in his eyes, telling me Brenda had threatened his wife at the grocery store, hinting she could stir up immigration trouble despite Marcus being a naturalized citizen for 20 years, I knew we had crossed into a darker territory. This wasn't HOA politics anymore. This was criminal intimidation, a federal offense, and that's where this part of the story leaves us. With a barn reduced to ashes, neighbors living in fear, and Brenda's shadow growing longer by the day. The hammer still sits on my table, a reminder of what was lost, and of what's about to be reclaimed. Because every move Brenda makes is building the case against her, and when justice comes, it won't be quiet. It will roar, but before that day arrives, a new threat is about to emerge, one that will prove Brenda's corruption goes deeper, wider, and far more dangerous than anyone ever imagined. The fire's smoke had faded, but the weight it left inside me had not. Every morning I walked past the ashes of the barn, and every morning the sight pushed me closer to the edge of something I hadn't felt in years. Rage, yes, but also doubt. I'd spent nearly 3 decades wearing the robe, telling myself I was a man of reason, a man who measured justice in words and statutes, not in fists or fire. But as I ran my hand over the charred boards still standing, I wondered if I was lying to myself. What good had all that restraint ever done when Margaret lay in the ground, when my grandfather's barn was ash, and when a woman like Brenda still walked free? At night, sleep didn't come easy. The faces of people I'd sentenced returned in the dark, and I remembered the guilt that always crept in afterward. Was I too harsh? Too lenient? Did I change their lives for the better? Or did I just play my part in a machine too big for one man to bend? Those doubts, buried for years, clawed back now that I stood without a bench to shield me. Out here, justice wasn't about gavels and legal briefs. It was about a woman with too much power trying to crush everything I loved, and I wasn't sure anymore if the law alone could stop her. That was my breaking point, realizing that the man I'd always believed myself to be was slipping. I found myself wondering what Seamus would have done if he'd faced someone like Brenda. He wasn't a judge. He was a farmer, a veteran, a man with calluses as thick as leather and a temper that could silence a room. Would he have waited for courts, or would he have handled it with his own 2 hands? The thought lingered like a dangerous seed, tempting me with answers I didn't want to admit. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, I sat at my kitchen table staring at Margaret's photograph. Her smile was soft, but her eyes seemed to ask me a question I didn't want to answer. How far are you willing to go? I poured whiskey into a chipped glass and took a long swallow, the burn doing nothing to settle the storm inside. For the first time since I'd left the bench, I felt like I was standing at a line I wasn't sure I should cross. That was when Michael Chen arrived, unannounced, dropping his heavy briefcase onto the table with the authority of a man who knew battles didn't wait for permission. "Thad," he said, "you're unraveling." His voice was steady, almost surgical. "I've seen that look before in clients who thought revenge was justice. Don't make their mistake." I wanted to argue, but I didn't. Michael had always been sharp enough to see through my defenses. He poured himself a coffee and leaned across the table. "You're not just fighting for yourself. Every neighbor who's been fined, bullied, or threatened, they're watching you. If you lose yourself, they lose hope." He was right, of course, but his words only deepened the conflict. If I stayed rigid, maybe Brenda would steamroll over me and everyone else. If I pushed back too hard, maybe I'd become no better than the enemies I used to sentence. The balance felt impossible, and that's when I realized sometimes the hardest war isn't with your enemies, it's with yourself. Michael wasn't my only visitor that week. A man named Tom Patterson came by, a veteran like Seamus, with the kind of posture that never really leaves a soldier. He parked his motorcycle in my driveway, pulled off his helmet, and said, "Judge, I hear you're not backing down." His story spilled out over the next hour. Every time he parked his motorcycle outside, Brenda slapped him with fines, calling it commercial equipment. He'd fought for the country, yet in his own home he was treated like a criminal. I saw the contradiction in him. His hands shook as he told me, not from fear, but from holding too much anger too long. He wanted to protect his family, yet he felt powerless in front of a woman wielding paperwork like a weapon. "You know what scares me most?" he asked, staring at the horizon. "It's not the fines. It's that my kids are starting to think we don't have rights, that Brenda decides everything. I can't let them grow up believing that." His words hit harder than any gavel. I saw myself in him. The weight of responsibility, the quiet fear of failing those who look up to you. But I also saw something else, a mirror of what I could become if I let this fight hollow me out. Tom was willing to fight, but his anger was eating him alive. If I wasn't careful, mine would too. The next morning, I drove through Millfield Estates. The rows of houses looked identical, each lawn trimmed like it had been cut with a ruler, every flower bed identical. Brenda's world was clean, polished, and suffocating. But behind those perfect shutters, I imagined families whispering, afraid of the next letter, the next fine, the next humiliation. Fear doesn't always scream. Sometimes it hides behind manicured hedges. Halfway through my drive, I saw Brenda herself. She was standing on her front porch in her cream suit, clipboard in hand, giving orders to a landscaper who nodded like his job depended on it, which, in a way, it probably did. She caught sight of my truck, and for a moment our eyes met. She smiled, that perfect, practiced smile. But her gaze held something darker, a challenge. It was a silent confrontation, one that promised the war wasn't over. Back home, I found another letter shoved under my door. This one wasn't anonymous. It was signed by Brenda herself. "Mr. Brennan," it read, "your continued resistance threatens the harmony of our community. You have one last chance to sell your property before consequences escalate." I held the letter in my hands, the paper trembling slightly as my pulse quickened. There it was, an open threat, written in black and white. But beneath the anger, something else rose in me, doubt. What if I fought and lost? What if Brenda crushed me and, worse, crushed the neighbors who had begun to put their faith in me? Was I dragging them into a battle they couldn't win? That night, I stood in the dark of my living room staring at the hammer on the table. For a long time, I just held it, feeling its weight. Part of me wanted to believe it could solve everything. Another part knew it couldn't. Margaret's picture stared back at me, silent as always, her smile a reminder of gentler days. I whispered to her, "Tell me what to do." Of course, there was no answer. Just the low hum of the fridge and the whisper of wind through the broken barn boards outside. And here's the truth nobody likes to admit. The closer you get to justice, the more it starts to look like revenge. The next day, Marcus Rodriguez came back to see me, his wife Maria with him this time. Her eyes were red from crying. Brenda had pushed harder, threatening Maria's job at the hospital, and now she was gone. One budget cut, one dismissal, and an entire family's future thrown into chaos. Maria clutched her husband's hand tightly, But when she spoke, her voice was steady. "Judge, we'll fight with you. Whatever it takes." Looking at her, I felt guilt wash over me. These people hadn't asked to be soldiers in my war, yet here they were, dragged into it because Brenda wanted my land. Could I live with myself if my decisions destroyed their lives further? Or would I regret it forever if I didn't fight back and let Brenda keep ruling unchecked? The choice was razor sharp, no good options, only consequences. Michael called that night with news. "Thad, the FBI is moving forward. We've got surveillance approval, but they need you to stay calm, to stay inside the law. If you cross that line even once, you jeopardize everything." I didn't answer right away, because part of me wanted to cross that line. Part of me wanted Brenda to feel even a fraction of the fear she'd spread. And that scared me more than anything, that I was starting to want it. The breaking point came at 3:17 a.m. when I woke to the smell of smoke again. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought the fire had returned. But it wasn't the barn this time, it was a rag burning near my back porch, a crude attempt at arson snuffed out only because the wind had shifted. I grabbed the hose and put it out, but the message was clear. Brenda wasn't waiting for lawsuits anymore. She was willing to burn everything to the ground. And if you think the barn fire was the end, you haven't seen how close the flames are to my front door now. When the fire was out, I sat on the porch steps. Drenched in sweat, the hose limp in my hands. My heart pounded, and for the first time in years, I felt something close to fear. Not for myself, but for what this meant. If Brenda was escalating, then everyone connected to me was in danger. Marcus, Maria, Tom, Mrs. Chen, the neighbors who'd finally found the courage to speak. The line had been crossed, and now the choice wasn't mine alone anymore. The next move would decide not just my fate, but theirs. As the first light of morning touched the horizon, I realized the law might not be enough to protect us. Something darker was coming. And that's where this part of the story ends, with the air heavy with smoke, the hammer waiting on the table, and the sense that the next strike Brenda makes could shatter everything we've built. The question now isn't whether I'll fight back. It's how far I'll go when the next fire comes. The rag fire on my porch was small, but its meaning was not. It wasn't about damage. It was about fear. A warning that if I didn't give in, worse would follow. I sat there for hours, the hose at my feet, the sky bleeding from black into gray, until the first light broke through. My coffee went cold in my hands, untouched. For the first time since this began, I admitted the truth to myself. Brenda wasn't just testing me. She was declaring war, and from this point on, every choice I made would either protect my neighbors or bury them. I called Agent Kowalski before the sun fully rose. She answered on the first ring. "Judge, talk to me." They tried again, I told her. "Not the barn this time. My porch." Silence stretched for a moment. "That changes everything. We're escalating the case. Don't move anything. Don't talk to anyone unless it's federal." But even as she spoke, I felt the weight pressing in. Federal investigations take time. Brenda wasn't waiting. She was cutting faster, deeper, and every hour gave her another chance to strike. That day, I drove into town, not because I needed supplies, but because I needed to be seen. Brenda thrived on intimidation. If I stayed hidden, she'd think she was winning. So I parked my old pickup in front of the grocery store, right where everyone could see me, and walked the aisles like nothing had changed. Neighbors avoided my eyes, glancing around nervously, but I caught whispers. The judge's barn, the fire, Brenda's name. Rumors were spreading like sparks in dry grass. When I stepped outside, she was waiting. Brenda stood near her pristine Mercedes, dressed in another suit that probably cost more than my monthly pension. She smiled like she was greeting an old friend, but her eyes were cold steel. "Mr. Brennan," she said sweetly, "what a shame about your property. Truly, the whole community mourns such a loss." I held her gaze. "Cut the performance, Brenda. You left your signature all over it." Her smile twitched, but only for a second. "You really should consider what's best for everyone. Sell the land. Take the money. Enjoy what's left of your retirement. Because if you don't, well, I'd hate to see more accidents." I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "You've made mistakes before, but this one, burning a veteran's heritage property, that's not an accident, Brenda. That's federal arson." Her eyes flickered just for a second. Fear or calculation? I couldn't tell. But in that brief silence, I knew I had pushed her too far to ever turn back. And that was the moment I realized. This wasn't a fight for survival anymore. It was a fight neither of us could walk away from. That night, I sat with Michael at my kitchen table, the hammer still lying between us like a silent witness. He pored over files, marking evidence with colored tabs. I barely heard him. My mind was stuck replaying Brenda's threat, her voice echoing like poison in the air. "Thad," Michael said, pulling me back. "We're close. We've got the paper trail, the intimidation, the recordings, but you have to hold the line. One wrong move and she'll paint you as unstable. That's what she's trying to do." I nodded, but the conflict inside me deepened. Holding the line meant waiting. Waiting meant giving her more chances to strike, and waiting had already cost me the barn. Later, when the house was quiet and the only sound was the ticking clock, I walked outside. The ashes still carried the faint scent of smoke, clinging to the night air. I clenched my fists until my nails bit into my palms. I wasn't sure I could wait anymore. The turning point came 2 days later. Marcus Rodriguez showed up at my door, his face pale, his hands shaking. "Judge," he whispered, "you have to see this." He handed me his phone. On the screen was a video of Brenda standing in the Rodriguez driveway, clipboard in hand, barking at Maria while their young daughter cried behind her. Brenda's voice cut sharp. "Families who don't cooperate don't belong in Millfield Estates. I'll make sure you regret staying here." Something broke inside me. This wasn't strategy anymore. This was cruelty aimed at children. For the first time since Margaret's death, I felt the kind of fury that stripped away doubt. I grabbed my coat and keys. Marcus stepped back. "Where are you going?" "To end this," I said. He tried to stop me, but I brushed past. The night air was sharp, filled with the promise of a storm. I drove faster than I should have, headlights carving through the dark until Brenda's house rose in the distance, glowing like a fortress in the middle of those cookie-cutter homes. I parked right in front, stepped out, and walked to her door. My fists pounded against the polished wood hard enough to echo down the street. Lights flicked on in neighboring houses, curtains shifted, whispers stirred. Brenda opened the door, her face composed but pale. "Mr. Brennan," she began, but I cut her off. "You crossed a line," I said, voice steady but shaking with contained anger. "You brought children into this. You think you're untouchable, but I'm telling you right now, this ends." For a moment, we stood locked in silence, two wills clashing in the glow of her porch light. Then she leaned closer, her whisper like a blade. "You don't scare me, Judge. You never did. And when I'm finished, you'll wish you had sold when you had the chance." And in that instant, I understood. The only way forward was through her, no matter the cost. I turned and walked back to my truck, but the decision was made. There was no going back. I wasn't just gathering evidence anymore. I was declaring war on Brenda, openly, directly, for everyone to see. The neighbors who peeked through their blinds would remember it. She would remember it. And I would carry the weight of it until the end. When I got home, Agent Kowalski was waiting on my porch, her car parked discreetly down the drive. She must have been tracking me. "Judge," she said sharply, "what the hell are you doing?" "She threatened Marcus's family," I snapped. "She's terrorizing kids. I'm done waiting." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "You're playing into her hands. She wants you angry. She wants you reckless so she can paint you as dangerous." I looked away, but she stepped closer. "You've spent your life teaching people that justice means patience and proof. Don't throw that away now. If you fall, we lose this case. Understand?" Her words were steady, but I saw something else in her face. Not just anger, but worry. She needed me as much as I needed her. For the first time, I wondered if she saw me not just as a witness, but as a mirror of herself. Someone who had given too much of their life to battles that never seemed to end. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, caught between fury and restraint. Margaret's memory weighed on me. What would she think if she saw me now, one step away from breaking every principle I'd ever lived by? By morning, the choice still burned in my chest. I walked outside and looked at the hammer on the porch rail, the same one I'd pulled from the ashes. I lifted it, felt its weight, and whispered, "This ends one way or another." Because sometimes the fight for justice doesn't just change your life, It consumes it completely. The storm that had been threatening all week finally broke that afternoon. Rain hammered the roof, thunder rolled across the fields, and lightning lit up the sky. It felt like the world itself was bracing for what came next. When the phone rang, I knew it wouldn't be good. Michael's voice was grim. "Thad, we've got a problem. Brenda's people filed for an emergency hearing. They're claiming you're unstable, that you threatened her last night. She's pushing for a restraining order." My blood ran cold. In one night, I had given her exactly what she needed, a weapon to use against me in court. I hung up and stared at the rain beating against the window. For the first time, I felt the walls closing in. The barn was gone. The neighbors were under attack. The FBI was circling. And now Brenda had turned my own anger into evidence. The darkness of that moment was heavier than anything I'd carried in years. Because now, for the first time, I wasn't sure if I could win. And that's where this part ends, with thunder shaking the windows, the hammer still in my hand, and Brenda's trap closing tighter around me. The fight had reached a turning point, one I couldn't undo. The only question left was how far I was willing to go before everything, my land, my name, my soul, was lost. The storm kept raging outside, pounding rain against the glass and rattling the shutters like bones. I sat in the dark, the hammer on the table in front of me, the restraining order hearing looming like a shadow I couldn't outrun. The house felt smaller than it ever had, its silence pressing against me from all sides. Every tick of the clock was a reminder that Brenda had finally turned my own anger into ammunition. For the first time in a long time, I felt cornered. The next morning, I walked into the courthouse with Michael by my side. His suit was sharp, his steps confident, but his jaw was tight in a way that told me he was worried. "She's playing dirty," he muttered, flipping through her filings one last time. "She's accusing you of harassment, intimidation, even emotional instability. It's a calculated smear." The courtroom was packed. Reporters, neighbors, curious faces, all waiting to see if the retired federal judge would be brought down by a suburban HOA queen. Brenda sat at the plaintiff's table in her navy blue suit, lips curved into a smile that was more victory lap than courtesy. Beside her was her attorney, a man I recognized immediately. I froze. "Michael," I whispered. "Do you see who that is?" Michael followed my gaze, his expression hardening. "Yeah, it's Robert Harlan. Robert Harlan wasn't just any lawyer. He was one of my former clerks, sharp, ambitious, and ruthless even as a young man. I had mentored him, guided him, even recommended him for his first job in a prestigious firm. And now he sat across the aisle representing Brenda Kilpatrick. His eyes locked on me with something colder than professionalism. And in that moment, I realized, sometimes the people you raise up come back not as allies, but as enemies with sharper knives than strangers ever could carry. The hearing began, and Harlan wasted no time. He painted me as an unstable old man clinging to power, a recluse lashing out at community leadership. He described my confrontation at Brenda's house not as a stand against corruption, but as a dangerous outburst. His words cut like blades, not because they were true, but because he delivered them with the kind of precision I had once admired in him. When it was Michael's turn, he fought hard. He reminded the court of my decades of service, of the lack of credible evidence tying me to any wrongdoing. He dismantled Brenda's claims point by point. But the damage was done. The seed of doubt had been planted, and I could feel the weight of eyes judging me, not as a retired federal judge, but as a man who might have finally lost his grip. When the judge granted Brenda a temporary protective order, the gasp from the crowd cut deeper than the ruling itself. I wasn't barred from my land, but I was forbidden from contacting Brenda directly. It was a small victory for her, but it carried the weight of humiliation for me. As I walked out, the reporters swarmed, their questions biting like gnats. Back home, I sat in silence while Michael paced the floor. "Thad, listen to me," he said. "We can still win. This doesn't change the evidence. The FBI is moving forward, but you've got to hold steady." I wanted to believe him, but my thoughts kept circling back to Harlan. Why him? Why now? He didn't need Brenda's money, he had plenty of his own. Which meant he wanted something else. Something personal. That night, I dug out an old box from my study, filled with letters, clerkship applications, notes from law clerks who had passed through my chambers. Robert's file was there, his resume, his letters of recommendation, my handwritten notes praising his brilliance. I remembered the pride I felt watching him argue his first big case. But I also remembered something else. His ambition, his hunger for status, his frustration when I denied him certain shortcuts. I had told him once, the law isn't about winning. It's about justice. He hadn't liked that answer. Maybe this was his revenge. The days that followed blurred together. The FBI kept building their case. Neighbors whispered support, but my reputation was unraveling in the public eye. Every article framed me as combative, unstable, a relic of the past fighting shadows. And all the while, Brenda tightened her grip, using the protective order as proof that she was the victim. Then came the twist I hadn't expected. A manila envelope slid under my door one morning. No return address. Inside was a stack of documents, emails, contracts, and bank transfers. And at the center of it all was Robert Harlan. He wasn't just Brenda's lawyer. He was an investor in Kilpatrick Development Solutions, one of the silent partners profiting from the land grabs. That was the moment the story flipped on its head. This wasn't just Brenda's empire. It was a network, and one of my own had been building it from the inside all along. The betrayal cut deep. I stared at the papers, my chest tight, my pulse hammering. All the years I'd spent teaching him about integrity, all the trust I'd given. It had led here to him helping dismantle the very values I'd lived for. Worse, it meant the fight wasn't just about one woman drunk on power. It was about a system of people, some I'd once known, who saw rural land as nothing more than profit. I called Michael, and when he arrived, I laid the documents out on the table. He scanned them quickly, his face darkening. This changes everything. Harlan's not just her attorney, he's complicit. And if we can prove he used his legal standing to further the fraud, that's disbarment. Maybe prison. But even as we spoke, I felt the walls closing in tighter. Because if Harlan was involved, who else from my past had their hands in this? Old colleagues, judges, politicians I'd once shaken hands with? The scope of it grew darker by the minute. Meanwhile, Brenda's attacks escalated. Mrs. Chen called in tears after receiving a notice that her house would be condemned for safety concerns. Tom Patterson was arrested again, this time for public nuisance after Brenda's allies staged a complaint. Every family that dared to speak with me became a target, and I carried the guilt of their suffering like a stone on my chest. One night, I sat with Marcus in his kitchen while Maria made coffee, her hands shaking. "Judge," Marcus said quietly, "maybe you should let it go." "We can't fight her! She's too powerful." The words stung. Not because he was wrong, but because they echoed my own secret doubts. Could I really beat her? Or was I dragging good people into a battle destined to burn them all? That was when Maria spoke up, her voice trembling but fierce. "No, Marcus. If he gives up, then Brenda wins. And if Brenda wins, people like her win everywhere. We can't let that happen." Her conviction lit something in me I thought I'd lost, but it also terrified me. Because the deeper this fight went, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about land anymore. It was about power, corruption, betrayal, and the lengths people would go to protect what they thought was theirs. And here's the twist most people never see coming. The enemy outside isn't the one that breaks you. It's the enemy inside your own circle. The next day, I received a call from Agent Kowalski. Her tone was sharp, urgent. "Judge, we need to talk." Not over the phone. In person. When she arrived, rain dripping from her coat, she carried a folder thicker than any she'd shown me before. She spread the papers across my kitchen table, the same table that now seemed to hold the weight of every secret in this county. "Here's the truth," she said, her voice low. "This isn't just Brenda. It's a multi-state operation. Developers, lawyers, even county officials, all tied together. And Judge Brennan, some of the names involved. You're not going to like them?" I scanned the list and my stomach dropped. Familiar names. Former colleagues, people I'd dined with, ruled alongside, trusted. Some had written me letters of sympathy after Margaret's passing. Others had praised me at my retirement ceremony. And here they were, exposed as partners in the same network trying to bleed rural families dry. The room tilted, the air thick. The betrayal wasn't just personal anymore. It was systemic. Everything I had spent my career defending was rotting from within. Kowalski's eyes locked on mine. We're at a turning point. Once we move forward, there's no undoing it. These people will fight like cornered wolves. You need to decide if you're ready, because when this blows open, it won't just destroy Brenda. It'll destroy people you once called friends. I sat back, the hammer on the table catching the dim light. My grandfather's hammer, the symbol I'd been carrying since the barn burned. It felt heavier now, not just with memory, but with the weight of everything about to unravel. Outside, thunder rolled again, as if the storm hadn't ended but only paused to gather strength. And that's where this part of the story leaves us, with the names of traitors staring back at me from a folder, my past colliding with my present, and the certainty that the next step I take will shatter everything I thought I knew. The question isn't whether the truth will come out. It's whether I'll survive it when it does. The folder lay open on my kitchen table, every page a wound. Names I had trusted, faces I had once admired, all tied to the same corruption that had burned my barn and poisoned my town. My stomach turned as I traced the signatures, the transactions, the evidence that said out loud what I had never wanted to believe, that the rot wasn't just Brenda. It was people I had once broken bread with, people who had clapped at my retirement speech, people who had looked me in the eye and told me we were fighting for the same cause. Now I knew the truth. They had been selling out their communities piece by piece, while I sat on the bench believing justice was real. Agent Kowalski's voice cut through my thoughts. Judge, once this goes public, you can't go back. Every ally will be tested, every friend questioned. These people will come for you harder than Brenda ever did. Are you ready? I didn't answer her right away. The rain tapped against the window, the hammer sat between us, and Margaret's picture stared from the shelf like she was listening. My pulse slowed, then steadied. I've been ready since the night my barn burned, I said finally. It ends now. 2 days later, the confrontation began. Federal subpoenas went out. FBI agents in dark suits walked into county offices, bank lobbies, law firms. Whispers turned into panic. And then Brenda struck back the only way she knew how, publicly. She called a community meeting at the Millfield clubhouse. Flyers went out, emails sent, neighbors pressured into attending. The message was clear. She wanted to frame herself as the savior of the community, to turn my neighbors against me before the truth crushed her. I walked into that clubhouse knowing it was the stage where everything would either collapse or come alive. The room was packed. Neighbors filled every chair, others stood against the walls. Brenda stood at the front, perfect as always in her cream suit, clipboard in hand, voice sharp enough to cut glass. Friends, she began, our neighborhood is under attack. Lies are spreading. Outsiders want to tear down the peace we've built. And sadly, some within our own community have fueled this chaos. All eyes turned to me. She let the silence linger, letting suspicion grow heavy in the air. Then she smiled that polished smile and said, Judge Brennan has been spreading dangerous claims. He confronted me at my home, threatened me, and now he wants to drag all of you into his personal war. But I promise you, Millfield will not be destroyed by bitterness. I stood slowly, every eye following. My voice didn't need volume, it needed truth. Brenda, you burned my barn. You threatened my neighbors. You fined veterans, silenced families, and tore this community apart. And now your lies are unraveling. The federal government has the documents, the bank records, the partnerships you've hidden, and soon everyone in this room will see you for what you are. Gasps rippled. Whispers filled the air. Brenda's face tightened, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she raised her chin and laughed softly. Evidence? Do you really expect these good people to believe you over me? And in that pause, with the whole room watching, I knew the truth. This wasn't about evidence anymore. It was about who they chose to believe when everything was on the line. The silence was broken by Maria Rodriguez. She stood, her voice trembling but loud enough to carry. We believe him. Marcus rose beside her. Then Tom Patterson, then Mrs. Chen. One by one, neighbors stood, some with tears, some with anger, but all with courage. We believe him, they said. For the first time, Brenda's mask cracked. Her smile faltered. Her eyes darted as the crowd shifted against her. But she wasn't done. She leaned forward, voice low and sharp. "You're making a mistake. You think he's your hero? He's just as corrupt as the rest. Ask him about Robert Harlan. Ask him about the deals he made years ago." The room turned again, eyes back on me, confusion flickering. My chest tightened. I hadn't made deals, not in the way she implied, but I had made decisions. Cases I'd ruled on, judgments that had cost people their homes or their futures. The weight of those choices pressed down hard. For a moment, the silence became unbearable. I lifted the hammer from the table at my side, holding it up so everyone could see. "This belonged to my grandfather. He built the barn Brenda burned with these hands. And he told me once, a tool can build or it can destroy. It depends on who holds it. That's what this is about. Brenda's used her power to destroy. I'll use mine to rebuild." The room erupted. Some cheered, some cried, some shouted questions, but the tide had turned. Brenda's grip was broken. That night, federal agents moved in. Brenda was taken into custody, her wrists in steel as the cameras flashed. But the story didn't end with her. The news hit harder when the larger network came out. Judges, lawyers, developers, even Robert Harlan himself caught in the web of greed. Still, even with Brenda gone, the cost was heavy. Families had been broken. Trust had been shattered. And I knew my fight wasn't just against her. It was against the part of myself that had doubted, that had almost let anger consume me. The night after Brenda's arrest, I walked back to the ruins of the barn. The rain had stopped, the sky was clear, stars burning bright above. I carried the hammer in my hand, the wood worn smooth by generations. Standing there, I could almost hear Seamus's voice, Margaret's laughter, the echoes of a past that had nearly been erased. And it hit me. Sometimes the fiercest battles don't end with victory. They end with silence, with the space to feel what was almost lost. I knelt in the dirt, pressing my hand against the earth where the barn once stood. My eyes burned, but I let the tears come. Not just for the barn, but for Margaret, for the neighbors who had suffered, for the years of believing justice lived only in courtrooms when it truly lived here, in the fight for what's right, no matter the cost. Days turned into weeks. The case widened, headlines spread, and I found myself at the center of something far larger than Millfield Estates. Reporters wanted interviews. Old colleagues sent letters, some apologizing, others furious. But none of that mattered. What mattered were the families who walked past my fence and waved without fear. What mattered was the sound of children laughing again on streets where silence had ruled. But then came the twist I hadn't seen coming. One evening, Michael arrived looking worn, his tie loosened, his face pale. He laid a single document on my table. "Thad," he said quietly, "you need to see this." I opened the file. My heart froze. There, in black and white, was a signature I knew too well, mine. A ruling I had signed years ago that had indirectly cleared the way for one of the developers now exposed in the scheme. My own judgment, used as a stepping stone for the very corruption I'd been fighting. I sank into my chair, the room spinning. "No," I whispered. "That can't be." Michael's eyes were steady but pained. "You didn't know." "You couldn't have known what they'd do with it. But they'll use this, Thad. They'll say you were part of it. They'll say you built the door they walked through." And in that crushing moment, I understood the final truth. Sometimes the fight you think you're winning hides a cost that can break you from the inside out. I sat in silence, the hammer heavy in my hand, the weight of legacy pressing harder than ever. I had faced Brenda. I had faced betrayal. But now I faced myself, the choices of a past I couldn't rewrite, the guilt of knowing that even with the best intentions, I had been part of the chain. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the windows like an omen. The barn was gone, Brenda was behind bars, but the shadow of my own decision lingered like smoke, and that is where this chapter leaves us, on the edge of triumph and tragedy, with justice served yet stained, and with the truth that even the most powerful judge cannot escape the echoes of his own gavel. The war with Brenda was over, but the battle with myself had only just begun. The signature on that paper haunted me. Even after Michael left, I sat staring at it under the dim light of my kitchen lamp. the ink like a shadow that refused to fade. I had spent my life believing that justice was a clean thing, that truth and fairness could be separated from the mess of human choices. But here it was, my own ruling, twisted into part of the very machine I had fought so hard to dismantle. The barn was gone, Brenda was in chains, but the guilt pressed heavier than all of it. In the days that followed, the neighborhood began to heal. The Rodriguez kids played outside again without fear. Tom's motorcycle rumbled down the street freely, no more fines taped to his door. Mrs. Chen planted flowers along her walkway, her smile tired but real. For the first time in months, laughter returned to Millfield Estates, quiet at first, then stronger. Yet for me, the silence in my house deepened. I carried the folder everywhere I went, as if holding my mistake close could keep it from spreading. Neighbors called me a hero, reporters praised my courage, but inside I felt like a fraud. They didn't see the line of ink that had once cleared a path for greed. They didn't see the late nights I stared at Margaret's photo, whispering apologies she would never hear. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the fields glowed gold, Marcus came to my porch. He didn't speak at first, just sat beside me sipping the coffee Maria had sent. After a while, he said, "Judge, you saved us. Don't let one paper erase what you've done." I nodded, but the weight in my chest didn't lift. Because Marcus was right and still he was wrong. You don't get to choose which pieces of your past matter. Sometimes the smallest one cuts the deepest. Still, life moved forward. The FBI investigation widened, indictments fell like dominoes, and the network that had fed on families like mine began to crumble. Brenda's name filled the papers, but eventually even she faded into the background as bigger names were dragged into the light. The world moved on, as it always does, but the scars stayed. I rebuilt the barn, not as it had been, but as something simpler, humbler. Just 4 walls, a roof, and space for tools. I worked with my hands, calluses forming again after years of soft papers and gavels. Each nail I drove felt like penance. Each board a prayer for those I had failed without knowing. Neighbors helped. Marcus lifted beams, Tom hauled lumber, Mrs. Chen brought food. The barn became more than mine. It became a place the community built together, a reminder that no matter how deep the fire burns, people can rise from ash. But at night, when the hammer rested and the laughter faded, the guilt returned. I knew I could never escape it. And maybe I wasn't meant to. Justice isn't clean. It never was. It lives in the mess, in the mistakes, in the cost that no one else sees. One morning, I took the old hammer, Seamus's hammer, the one that had survived the fire, and hung it on the wall of the new barn. Its handle was cracked, its head darkened with soot, but it belonged there, a reminder of what was lost and what was rebuilt. I whispered, "This is where it ends." But deep inside, I knew it wasn't an ending. It was a circle. Months passed, and people stopped asking about Brenda. The story became another headline, another scandal swallowed by time. But Millfield was different now. The neighbors waved to each other. They spoke up when something felt wrong. Fear no longer walked the sidewalks. It had cost us dearly, but the silence had been broken. For me, the cost was heavier. I lived with the knowledge that even as I fought for justice, I had been part of the cracks that let the rot in. I lived with the memory of Margaret, the barn, the fire, and the smoke. Yet I also lived with something else, the sound of children laughing again. The sight of Maria planting flowers, the strength of Tom's hand when he gripped mine and said, "We're still here because of you." Maybe that was enough. Maybe justice was never about purity. Maybe it was about scars, about carrying them, showing them, and choosing to keep walking anyway. On the last night of autumn, I sat alone in the barn. The boards creaked softly in the wind, the smell of sawdust still fresh. I looked at the hammer hanging on the wall, its shadow stretching long in the lantern light. I thought about my grandfather, about Margaret, about the man I used to be and the man I had become. And then I thought about the people who would carry this place after me, people who had seen what happens when silence is forced, and who would never let it return. The barn stood tall, not as a monument to victory, but as proof of survival. And maybe that was all it needed to be. As I left, I shut the door gently, the lantern casting one last glow across the hammer. The night was cold, the stars sharp, and in the stillness I felt both the weight of the past and the fragile hope of tomorrow. Because in the end, Justice doesn't live in courts or headlines. It lives in the hands of people who refuse to let fear win. It lives in barns rebuilt, in neighbors who stand together, in the quiet strength of a community that chooses light after fire. And that's the truth I leave you with. If this story has moved you, if you've seen pieces of your own battles here, I ask you to join me. Subscribe to this channel, share these words, and leave your thoughts in the comments. This is HOA Truth Tales, and your voice matters. Because silence is what lets the fire spread, and stories like these are what keep it from burning again. The hammer hangs still, watching, waiting. Not as a weapon, not as a tool, just as a reminder that every choice carries weight, and every scar tells the truth.